why the Halfling and the Spaceman. So you kind of got the story behind that.
So why don't you tell the story this time?
Uh, we were we were trying to figure out something creative to do because we have always been a creative couple, and we published a magazine. We published a gaming magazine. We published an online magazine dedicated to short pulp noir stories. Um, and so that kind of had to get put on hiatus because, well, we had to pay for all the stories and the art. And so we weren't getting any money for that. So it kind of became an issue with, we're going to have to figure out a way how to pay for this. So we kind of put it on hold, and we were talking about doing a podcast, and we thought about the idea of doing a podcast that was related to our online magazine. And we kind of got a false start with that. So then we started thinking about other things that we could do. And Roger, or Spaceman over here, said, "Well, we know people because we've done lots of
Lots
creative
of.
things. We were part of an anime club and uh, helped out at anime convention for 12 years. We published the magazine. We're doing the online stuff. We know artists. We know writers. We know organizers. So we're like, okay, let's figure out how to make that into a podcast. So that's how this got started, because we decided that people who are into fandom, they have stories to tell. And people who are doing something creative in fandom, like cosplay, writing, comic book illustrator, club organizer, convention organizer, whatever, you have a story. And so other people who are like us nerds want to hear other people's stories and maybe get inspired by it. So that's sort of how that came to be.
Yeah, and there are tons of people out there just doing cool stuff all over the place. Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks now, but we just talked to a guy in Australia who makes model paints, and he discovered he could not get good model paints in Australia. So he just took it on himself to start making model paints. And we actually found out about him through a contact in Canada who worked for OdaFest, who we met the people who work for OdaFest through a YouTuber named Duchess Celestia,
So,
who does an art commentary channel. So there is this vast network of people just doing really interesting and awesome and nerdy things. And we want to talk to all of them. We're not going to have enough time, but we're going to do our
uh,
darndest.
yeah, we've had some very interesting people on the show. One of our early guests, she really, it shows how old we are. We did not know about digital storytelling. Does anybody know about digital
Yeah. Who knows about
storytelling?
digital storytelling?
Anybody?
No?
Okay. Oh, good. Phew. Okay. We're not the only ones. Yay.
Okay.
But yes, the early guest was a digital storyteller. Well, when we got her information from a friend of ours, he just told us that she was a cosplayer. She is a cosplayer, but she does cosplaying through digital storytelling. And we had no concept of what that was. It was like speaking some foreign language.
And what digital storytelling is there is a thing on TikTok where you can do something called duetting, where you can take and insert yourself
Okay,
into
so
somebody
she
else's
knows.
video. And what digital storytellers do is they cosplay and they make up stories, and then they use the duet features to move the storyline along.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's un, it's this constantly unfolding. Let's pretend with cosplay.
Hmm.
It,
Yeah.
it, and she got started on it during the pandemic when there wasn't really much to do.
Yeah. So, but like I said, hearing her talk about this was almost like hearing a foreign language.
And we thought we knew
Uh,
everything.
yeah, we do not. So
We've been around the field a few times.
a few times. But that's the beauty of what we do is we find out all sorts of interesting things from interesting people. And again, they all have stories. And so we want to hear these stories. We want to know, well, how did you go from watching Star Wars when you were a kid with your mom, which we hear a lot of,
Star Trek,
Star Trek,
Star Trek,
Star Wars,
Stargate.
Stargate, anything with a star in it. How did you go from being that kid watching that with mom and dad to writing speculative fiction, for instance? Yeah, that's a story. That's that, and there's a progression. Yeah, lots of pitfalls, some victories. Uh, what do you think? What do you think has been the most interesting story that we have heard thus far? What would you think?
I got nothing. They're all pretty darn interesting.
Well, they are. Yeah, I was gonna say I actually think I think the one that we did with Wole was
Oh
probably
yeah.
the
Oh
most
yeah.
interesting.
So talk about Wole.
He is Wole is a story. He writes fiction, or yeah, speculative fiction, I guess is what really
Right.
would do. But anyway, he lives in Malaysia, but by birth he is oh, where is he from?
Nigeria.
Nigeria. Sorry. He's Nigerian by birth, moved to Malaysia by way of London. And he became a Nebula. Uh, I don't think he actually won a Nebula
No,
award, but he was on a short
he was
list.
nominated.
Yeah, he was nominated. But he had a fascinating story,
Oh,
fascinating
and
journey.
he's a petrochemical engineer as
Yeah.
his full-time trade.
Which it's really cool to find out these people's day jobs, because you're like, wait a minute, what do you, what do you do?
It's like I turned to Jan and I say, "You know, we're talking to an actual rocket scientist, right?"
Right. Exactly. Most of the people we have on the show are smarter than us. So yeah.
Significantly.
So, but it's loads of fun. But you want to talk about what our process is for getting an episode together?
Sure. Well, why don't you talk a little bit first about how you get guests?
Well, okay. So yeah, there's sort of an entire process of getting an episode together. It starts with finding a guest, an appropriate guest who's got an interesting story. We do have a guest application on our website, but most of the guests that we get never filled out the darn application. Most of it's from people that recommended friends or other authors, for instance, that they've met in writing groups, or like Roger was talking about the model paint guy was recommended by a Twitch streamer who does model building on Twitch. Uh,
Who
you know,
who works for Otakon
works for
in Calgary,
Otakon,
Ontario.
who gave us this YouTuber. Yeah, it's just they met, they tell two friends
Otafest.
and so on, so
Otafest.
on and so on. But so that's that. Like I said, we got an application on our website. People never use it. We get emails from people, or somebody sends an introductory email with a copy and saying, hey, Roger or Janet, meet so and so, and they've copied the person, hey, you need to talk to these guys, and so that's kind of how it gets started, and then the whole process of actually scheduling a time for recording.
Now that's the hardest part.
For me anyway.
Oh,
For me anyway, that's probably the hardest part, is because what'll happen is they'll say, "Great. Oh yeah, we want to be on, I want to be on let's do this." And I'll say, "Okay, well, usually usually we like to record these times. Um, let's pick a date and time." And then crickets. I so I'll send them an email back. Hey, you still interested? Oh yes, I'm so sorry. I this and this happened, so I apologize. Yes, I'm still interested. And then it just keeps going like that until finally we get a scheduled time and date. So that's the first part of the process. Um, then comes the actual date and time. Um,
All right. We do all our interviews using Zoom. So anybody who survived the pandemic knows about Zoom. And the reason we do our interviews with Zoom is because it is the easiest thing for anybody to use. You just click a link.
mhm,
We're going to eventually move over to a different service if we can, um, but not yet. And we only do audio. We're recording us today because we have a YouTube channel that is a sort of a side project where we're documenting conventions.
mhm,
The but the podcast itself is only audio. So we have a kind of a mid-range setup on the equipment. We use a couple of Shure SM58 microphones, which I would not suggest for podcasting. They're really for singers. We use a mixer, and then I just record everything into the mixer and then put it on the computer, edit it on the computer, and then upload it to the internet.
mhm.
But if you want to you don't have to have expensive equipment if you want to get started podcasting. You can get started with just your cell phone
Yeah.
or, a relatively inexpensive USB microphone.
Mhm.
But the thing you discover if you get the podcasting bug is that you're going to spend money and you should be wise about the money you spend. I've spent at least $400, maybe five on stuff that we don't use. Um, because it wasn't right or it didn't work out or it was the right kind of thing, but the wrong thing. And, that's been over, like a course of a year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard when you get started and you want to start buying better equipment. It's really hard to figure out what to get unless you can actually just try out the equipment before you invest the money. And if you are lucky enough to find a place that you can go to do that, do it. Because otherwise you will think, "Oh, this is what we need. This is what we're gonna use." And then, you get it, and then, it's a little lackluster. It's like, "Well, it doesn't really do or it doesn't
Right.
sound good, or it's not giving us the quality."
Right, and the
Eh,
thing that YouTube won't tell you is what value you're getting for your money. You can watch a YouTube video that says, "Great boom arms for $100."
mhm.
Okay, sounds great, but ultimately you're getting $100 boom arm. You know
That does this.
that just flops down.
Because the mic that you got that you thought was the one
Yeah,
is
yeah,
too heavy
it's too
for
heavy
the
for the other boom
armor.
arm. So
True story.
right now she's using a table stand because the mic that I bought her was too heavy for the boom arm.
Yeah, and there's a lot of issues with sound echoing or you know reverb. It just all sorts of things. So then you start thinking about soundproofing and echo proofing your space. And then comes the question of, should we start a YouTube?
Yeah,
Because everybody will tell you you need to be on YouTube.
or well, yeah, it sounds great. Are you on YouTube? No. Can I get your podcast on YouTube? No, it's a podcast. Well, I see podcasts on YouTube all the time. It's a traditional podcast, but is it on YouTube?
No, it's on Spotify.
It's on
Okay.
Spotify. Look on Spotify.
Yes.
Uh, but no, YouTube is important. Uh,
Oh
the
yeah.
the great irony of all of this is that we used to publish an online magazine for detective fiction, and we started talking about doing a podcast in support of that. and we had a name picked out. I registered the internet domain, and we were ready. And I actually did my first interview with someone who was a writer who wrote mysteries and other things the day before the lockdowns. I mean, literally, we both worked for the same organization, and we got together in a conference room and we recorded, and the recording sounded like crap. And we decided to redo it. And that afternoon, they sent us home, and we didn't see each other for at least a year and a half.
Yeah.
So during that time, the podcast changed from being about, you know, a detective
Yeah, in support of
in
the in
support of
support of
the online
our
zine
online
to
zines.
just being about people we've met along our way
Yeah,
and people we hope to met in the future. Meet.
me.
Because every geek has a story to tell.
Um, well, I guess probably. Oh, well, okay. You've already mentioned that. After the actual recording comes all of the editing process, and then getting it uploaded. To the various podcast venues.
Oh yeah, an
Um,
important thing to know about that though is if you have good enough content, you don't have to be as meticulous with your editing. If your content is lackadaisical, then people are going to they're going to tune out if the audio is not clear. One of my favorite podcasts is, what is it called? Midnight Terrors.
Midnight Terrors.
Midnight Terrors podcast. It's about horror movies. It's just these two guys that just riff on horror movies, and they are foul mouthed and they are funny. The thing that carries them is that they're foul mouthed and funny.
The banter that they have,
Yeah,
you
they
just
have such good
you
chemistry.
listen and you laugh, and you're not worried about that it sounds like they're in a you know some kind of chamber or something. So content matters, um, but we that's one reason why we try to make ours conversations instead of interviews.
Yeah, because we have
Yeah.
nothing special to say about ourselves.
Well, not just that, but we're not
It's true.
professionals. We're not professionals.
We're just a couple old nerds that have been to more than our share of conventions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Sorry, game.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's right.
Exactly.
So submit money to our Patreon. Just
Uh, but I guess at this point, um, oh yeah, let's finish up the process. Sorry, I blanked for a second. So after it's edited and uploaded, then comes the social media piece.
oh God.
Everybody knows you got to have social media. You gotta do Twitter and all of
Twitter,
that.
Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah, just
TikTok, if you're if you
so
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 inclined.
you got to make sure it gets
Mastodon.
okay.
Just don't
Okay, are we done?
I don't know.
I think we're done.
Reddit.
Anyway, you get the idea. And so then it's on all the social media. Then I email the person who we had a conversation with and tell them, that it's up, and send them the link and say, hope you really liked it. We liked it a lot. Please share. Please share. So,
We beg you, we need listeners.
and oh, by the way, is there anybody that you could recommend as another guest for us? And that's really, again, that's a large part of getting the guest is people recommend people that they know, and they think, oh, this guy would have a really fun time talking to you guys, and so far, people have really been very, I guess, supportive of
Really?
what we
Yeah, they
do,
have.
and have been willing to send other people our way, which I think is great because that means that they enjoyed what they did with us to start with. Um, so is there anything else that I mean? I
No,
think
I
that's
think that's pretty
probably
much it about the
yeah.
podcast.
I think that's pretty much it.
So does anybody have any questions about,
Yeah.
well, just about what we do or about podcasting in general? Yeah. Yes.
It is. It is. Hold on a second. I'll do this too.
She's got, yeah, we have the podcast logo on the back.
See, So, uh, I think it's pretty obvious who's who.
Yeah.
But are any of you guys podcasters? Hadn't asked that. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, do you guys listen to podcasts? Some? Okay. No, you don't? Oh, okay. So you're gonna start listening to the Halfling and the Spaceman. Start with
Or if you
us.
like horror movies, Midnight
Or
Terrors.
Midnight Terrors.
If you're
They
not
were they
offended by
were they were
strong
a lot of
language.
fun. Oh, if you're into Gundam, there is a podcast called Mobile Suit Breakdown. We had those two guys on our show recently. And it is exactly what it sounds like. They started from the very beginning of Gundam back in the 70s and have worked their way through the series. They're up into the early 80s now, but they have taken every episode and they have broken it down. They have analyzed. They have consultants come in, like child psychologists, a stage martial art expert,
Yeah, and they really
physicists.
do a deep dive
I
on this
mean,
stuff.
yeah, this is like over an hour long talk about one episode where they just break it down. So if you're into Gundam, that might be an interesting podcast for you to check out. Mobile Suit Gundam. Um,
The Mobile Suit
a breakdown.
Breakdown.
Sorry, my
Breakdown.
yeah,
It's about Mobile Suit Gundam, but it's Mobile Suit Breakdown.
right, right. So are any of y'all thinking about getting into podcasting? Anybody interested in doing that? It really doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much. If you just have an idea, um, and you just I say it doesn't take much, but it really kind of depends on what your motivation is. I guess we should talk briefly about that.
Yeah, we should. We
Because
should.
sometimes you just want to rant about something, or you just have an opinion about something, and so you start your podcast, and that's what you do. You don't care if anybody listens. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. You're just talking. You're just doing your thing, and then and those are hobby podcasters. Even hobby podcasters need to kind of be at least a little serious about what they're doing. Um, we we don't care so much about the numbers of listeners. We care about the stories that we're hearing from our guests. So that's motivation. Do you want to do this and garner tons of listeners, or do you just want to talk and enjoy what it is you're talking about? And then, kind of figure out how you want to go about that. Because depending on your motivation, that's what's going to drive your process and what you ultimately end up doing. Um, Anything I'm missing?
No, that's perfectly it. And most podcasts, most people abandon their podcast after less than 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And you really don't tend to see revenue on your podcast if you're looking for revenue until after about 2 years, unless you get really, really lucky. And
Mhm.
occasionally people get really, really lucky. You know, one of all the other story aside, one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast now and we're going to keep doing it is because we're getting close to retirement age. You can't tell by the white hair in my beard, but so I've
We
seen
are
people.
seasoned
Yeah, we're seasoned
citizens.
citizens,
We're not
and
senior. We are seasoned.
yeah, we're seasoned. That's right, well seasoned. But you see so many people in retirement who don't have anything to do. They have nothing to look forward to, and they sit in their house all day and they vegetate. And
They
we
go to the
said,
grocery store. They go to the doctor, and that's about it.
that's it. That the doctor is the highlight of their week.
Yeah.
And we said, that's not for us. We're going to continue to go to conventions. We're going to do the podcast. That's
Yeah.
what we're going to do.
Yeah. Um, So I guess we're about ready to wrap it up because we're about out of time. But last call for any questions or any comments. Do we have any new listeners? Just
M most recent? Uh,
Uh, well, that's the one going up tomorrow, right?
no, no, no,
Or
he wasn't the most one recent one recorded.
oh.
Oh, you mean recorded or going up? Okay, we'll do both. On Sunday is the guy from Australia that makes Puddle Paints. So tomorrow he's gonna come up, we're gonna have it. But the most recent person we interviewed
Matt Jones.
was it Matt Jones?
Yeah, no. No, 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 'cause we've done Midnight Terror since then. Uh,
It might have been Midnight Terrors.
we're losing track.
Yeah. Okay.
We're losing track. Probably the podcasters who do Midnight Terror
All right.
podcast.
We'll tell you about
Uh,
both people. Midnight Terrors podcast is by this guy named Kevin. I cannot remember his last name.
Roach.
Kevin Roche, Roche. And we were at Atomicon in Charleston, South Carolina, and that's where we met him. And we got to talking about podcasting, and he's doing a podcast about horror movies, and we're going to come on to his podcast and riff on horror movies at some point. It's going to be interesting considering we're PG rated and they're like R rated.
Or even X sometimes.
Yeah, I'll say things like,
Yeah.
I'll say something like, "Dang it!"
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, the other person that we just recently interviewed was Matt Jones, and Matt Jones was the guy who organized SableCon, and SableCon was a convention in Knightdale, North Carolina, dedicated to African American comics creators, and he has his own comic company, Akichi Comics.
Mhm. I keep
That is inspired by manga and anime. And so we had him on the podcast to talk about him starting his comic book publishing business and starting a convention.
Mhm.
And, this convention is larger than SableCon. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so SableCon was small the first year, but we were glad we had a chance to be there.
Yeah.
And it's our only other YouTube video.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So if you want to see what the people at SableCon were like, you just turn on the YouTube and see us and me sticking the microphone out at people like this.
And true story. Matt Jones is 6'4". I am not. But I was the one who got to interview him. And so, Matt, how do you think it's going?
And it was
Literally, you
really
can
like
see
that.
why I'm the halfling. Anyway, so I guess that's about it. Unless anybody has another question or comment. All right.
And if you do decide you want to sort of podcast, just reach out to us. We'll be glad to give you any advice that we can.
Yeah,
We're all about community.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank y'all very much. It's been great talking to you.